Indianapolis, Indiana. November 14, 1961. 9 o'clock in the morning. Ray Charles is asleep in room 614 of the Sheraton Lincoln Hotel, his body wrapped in sweat-soaked sheets, his mind floating somewhere between consciousness and the numb oblivion that heroin provides. His band left hours ago to hear Aretha Franklin perform at a club called the Pink Poodle. Ray stayed behind. He always stayed behind when he needed to be alone with his medicine. A knock at the door. Soft at first, then harder. Louder. Insistent. Ray stirs. His blind eyes open to the same darkness they always see. "Who is it?" he calls out, his voice thick with sleep and chemicals. "Western Union," comes the reply. "Telegram for Mr. Charles." Ray feels his way out of bed. He's wearing nothing but his underwear. He navigates the unfamiliar hotel room by touch and memory, his bare feet padding across the carpet until he reaches the door. He unlocks it. He pulls it open. And two Indianapolis police detectives rush in like they've been waiting their whole lives for this moment. "Police! Don't move!" Ray stumbles backward, confused, blind, half-naked, his hands reaching for something to steady himself. The detectives are already tearing through the room. They know exactly where to look. They go straight to the medicine cabinet in the bathroom. They find what they came for, a leather zippered bag containing a syringe, hypodermic needles, and 10 capsules of heroin. In the nightstand, they find a cold cream jar filled with marijuana. One of the detectives grabs Ray's arm and pushes up his sleeve. What he sees makes him pause. Track marks. Dozens of them. Old scars and fresh wounds running up and down Ray Charles's arms like a roadmap of self-destruction. The detective will later testify in court that they were the worst track marks he had ever seen in his career. Ray Charles, the genius of soul, the man who had revolutionized American music, the artist who had just topped the charts with "Hit the Road Jack," was a heroin addict. And he had been one for 15 years. What happened in the next few hours would expose Ray's darkest secret to the world. But what happened in the next few years would determine whether that secret would destroy him, or set him free. To understand how Ray Charles ended up half-naked in an Indianapolis hotel room with needle marks covering his arms, you need to go back 16 years. Back to Seattle, Washington, 1947. Back to a 17-year-old blind kid who had just lost his mother, lost his brother, lost everything except his music and his pain. Ray had arrived in Seattle with almost nothing. He was running from Florida, running from the memories, running from the ghost of his mother Aretha who had died when he was 14 and left a hole in his soul that nothing could fill. He found work playing piano in nightclubs, the kind of dark, smoky joints where the whiskey was cheap and the crowd didn't care if you were blind as long as you could make them forget their troubles. It was in one of those clubs that someone first offered Ray a joint. Marijuana. Just something to take the edge off before a performance, they said. Something to calm the nerves. Ray was 17 years old, alone in the world, carrying grief that would have crushed a grown man. He said yes. The marijuana led to harder things. That's how it always works. Within a year, Ray had discovered heroin. And heroin had discovered him. The first time Ray shot up, he felt something he hadn't felt since his mother died. Peace. The pain that lived in his chest, that constant ache of loss and loneliness, it just disappeared. For a few hours, he wasn't the blind orphan who couldn't save his brother. He wasn't the abandoned son whose father had never wanted him. He was just floating, warm, safe, free. He chased that feeling for the next 17 years. The thing about Ray Charles was that he was what they called a working addict. He never let the heroin stop him from performing. He never missed a show because he was too high. He built his entire career while shooting up multiple times a day, somehow managing to function at the highest level of his profession while being completely dependent on one of the most destructive drugs known to man. "Cigarettes and smack are the two truly addictive habits I've known," Ray would later write in his autobiography. "You might add women." He said it casually, almost proudly, as if being able to function while addicted to heroin was some kind of accomplishment. In a way, it was. But it was also a prison. And Ray Charles had been locked inside for almost 2 decades. By 1961, Ray Charles was one of the most famous musicians in America. He had signed with Atlantic Records in 1952 and created a sound that nobody had ever heard before, a fusion of gospel, blues, and jazz that would come to be called soul music. "I've Got a Woman" in 1954. "What Did I Say" in 1959, a song so sexually charged that radio stations banned it, which only made it more popular. "Georgia on My Mind" in 1960, a ballad so beautiful it made grown men weep. Frank Sinatra called him the only true genius in show business. The nickname stuck. Ray Charles was the genius. He was untouchable. He was a crossover artist before anyone knew what that meant, selling millions of records to both black and white audiences in an era when the two rarely mixed. But behind the sunglasses and the smile, behind the piano and the voice, Ray Charles was slowly killing himself. Every day, multiple times a day, he would retreat to a private space and cook his heroin in a spoon, draw it into a syringe, and inject it into veins that were starting to collapse from overuse. The people around him knew. His band knew. His managers knew. His wife Dellaby knew. She had found his kit shortly after they got married in 1955 and confronted him about it. Ray promised he would quit. He didn't. He couldn't. Some people who knew Ray believed that the people around him were partly responsible for his addiction. After all, Ray was blind. He couldn't drive to a street corner and buy drugs himself. He couldn't see to cook the heroin or find a vein. Someone had to help him. Someone always helped him. Quincy Jones, who worked with Ray in those early years, later said that the enablers around Ray kept his addiction going long after he should have been forced to stop. But nobody wanted to be the one to cut off the genius. Nobody wanted to be responsible for what might happen if Ray Charles couldn't get his fix. The law had come for Ray before. In 1955, he was arrested backstage at a venue when police found loose marijuana and drug paraphernalia, a burnt spoon, a syringe, needles. The charges were quietly dropped. Ray was becoming too famous to prosecute over a little weed. In 1958, Ray was arrested on a Harlem street corner for possession of narcotics and equipment for administering heroin. Again, the charges went away. Ray had good lawyers, and prosecutors had other priorities. But the Indianapolis arrest in November 1961 was different. This time, the police had been tipped off by a drug dealer who had sold Ray the heroin 2 days earlier. This time, there were witnesses, evidence, and a very public arrest. This time, Ray Charles's secret was about to become front-page news. After the detectives found the drugs and the needles, they pulled Ray's sleeves up and saw those track marks, the worst they'd ever seen, they said. They handcuffed him, still in his underwear, and led him out of the hotel room. At the police station, they fingerprinted him. They photographed him. And then they did something that would haunt Ray Charles for years. They let the press in. Camera flashes exploded in Ray's face. He couldn't see them, but he could feel them, the heat of the bulbs, the sound of shutters clicking, the chaos of reporters shouting questions at him. He felt exposed, humiliated, stripped of all the dignity he had worked so hard to build. "How did you get started on drugs, Ray?" someone shouted. And Ray Charles, the genius, the man who had always been in control, broke down crying. "I started using stuff when I was 16, he said through his tears, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "When I first started in show business. Then I had to have more and more." The reporters kept firing questions. The cameras kept flashing. Ray stood there, blind and helpless, tears rolling down his cheeks from behind his dark glasses. "I don't know what to do about my wife and kids," he sobbed. "I've got a month's work to do and I have to do it. I really need help. Nobody can lick this by themselves." It was the most vulnerable Ray Charles had ever been in public. And it was splashed across newspapers the next morning for the whole world to see. The Indianapolis case went to court in January 1962. Ray's lawyers argued that the police had entered his room under false pretenses. They had claimed to be Western Union, after all, and that they had conducted an illegal search without a warrant. The evidence, they argued, should be thrown out. Judge Burke agreed. 3 weeks later, he ruled that the search was illegal and dismissed all charges. Ray Charles walked out of the Indianapolis courthouse a free man. "No comment," he told the reporters waiting outside. And he went back on the road. The irony was almost too perfect. At the time of his arrest, Ray's single, "Hit the Road Jack," was in the Billboard Top 10. By the time the case was dismissed, "Unchain My Heart" had taken its place on the charts. The title seemed to mock his situation, hitting the road while chained to a habit he couldn't break. For most people, that arrest would have been a wake-up call. A sign that things had gone too far. A moment to stop and reconsider. But Ray Charles wasn't most people. And heroin wasn't most drugs. 3 years passed. Ray kept using. He kept touring. He kept making hit records: "I Can't Stop Loving You," "Busted," "Take These Chains From My Heart." He was bigger than ever, a genuine crossover superstar who had proven that a blind black man from the segregated South could conquer the entire music industry. But the drugs were catching up with him. His veins were collapsing. He was running out of places to inject. The heroin was eating him alive from the inside, and everyone around him knew it was only a matter of time before something gave. On Halloween 1964, Ray Charles was arrested for the 3rd time. This time at Boston's Logan Airport. This time with enough heroin to put him away for years. The newspapers called it a plane load of heroin. That was an exaggeration, but not by much. Ray was facing serious federal charges. His lawyers couldn't get him out of this one with a technicality. The evidence was solid. The prosecutors were determined. Ray Charles was looking at 2 years in federal prison. And for the first time in 17 years, Ray Charles was forced to make a choice. Prison, or recovery. Keep using, or start living. He chose to fight. Before his trial, Ray made a decision that would either save his life or end it. He checked himself into St. Francis Hospital in Linwood, California. He told the doctors he wanted to quit. He told them he was ready. He told them to do whatever it took. What it took was cold turkey. For those who have never experienced heroin withdrawal, it's almost impossible to describe. Your body, which has become completely dependent on the drug to function, suddenly has nothing. Every nerve ending screams. Every muscle cramps. You sweat through your sheets, then freeze so hard your teeth chatter. You vomit until there's nothing left, and then you keep vomiting. You hallucinate, seeing things that aren't there, hearing voices, feeling insects crawling under your skin. And through it all, your brain is screaming one thing: just one more hit. Just one more taste. Just one more moment of peace. The craving is physical, mental, spiritual, it consumes every fiber of your being. Ray Charles went through 4 days of this hell. 96 hours. 5,760 minutes. Every single one of them agony. The first day was the worst. Within hours of his last dose, the symptoms began. Sweating. Anxiety. A feeling like his bones were trying to crawl out of his skin. Ray lay in that hospital bed, gripping the rail so hard his knuckles went white, fighting the urge to rip out his fore and run. By the second day, the vomiting started. The diarrhea. The muscle cramps that felt like someone was twisting his limbs in opposite directions. Ray couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He could barely think. All he knew was pain, and the knowledge that one phone call, one moment of weakness, could make it all go away. The third day brought the hallucinations. Ray saw things in the darkness of his blindness, shadows moving, figures standing at the foot of his bed. He heard his mother's voice, calling to him from somewhere far away. He heard his brother George, the brother who had drowned in the washtub 40 years ago, asking why Ray hadn't saved him. The nurses later said they had never seen anyone fight so hard. When the cramps hit, Ray gritted his teeth and rode them out. When the hallucinations came, he talked himself through them, reminding himself what was real and what wasn't. When his body begged for just one more hit, just one more taste of that peace he had been chasing since his mother died, he whispered the same words over and over. You're blind. You ain't dumb. You lost your sight, not your mind. His mother's words. The words that had carried him through blindness, through poverty, through the death of everyone he loved. The words that were now carrying him through the worst battle of his life. On the fourth day, something shifted. The cramps began to ease. The sweating slowed. The hallucinations faded. Ray's body, battered and broken, was finally starting to remember how to function without heroin. On the fifth day, Ray Charles woke up clean for the first time in 17 years. His body was weak. His mind was foggy. He had lost 15 pounds in 4 days. But the chains were broken. He stayed at St. Francis for 4 months, rebuilding his strength, working with psychiatrists, including a Viennese psychoanalyst named Dr. Frederick Hacker, who would become crucial to his case. Then he was transferred to McLean Hospital in Massachusetts for further treatment and evaluation. The total recovery took nearly a year. But when Ray Charles finally walked out of that hospital, he was a different man. When Ray finally returned to court, the prosecutors wanted blood. 2 years in federal prison. A massive fine. An example made of the famous junkie who had been thumbing his nose at the law for over a decade. But Ray had something the prosecutors hadn't expected: Dr. Frederick Hacker, a psychiatrist who had been treating him during his recovery. Dr. Hacker took the stand and testified about Ray's determination to get clean. He described the cold turkey withdrawal, the months of treatment, the genuine transformation he had witnessed. The judge listened. And then he did something remarkable. Instead of sending Ray Charles to prison, he offered him a deal. If Ray agreed to undergo regular examinations by government-appointed physicians for the next year, the judge would postpone the verdict. If Ray stayed clean, if he proved that his recovery was real, the judge would reconsider the sentence. Ray agreed. He had no choice. But more than that, he wanted to prove, to the judge, to the world, to himself, that he was more than his addiction. That the genius could beat this thing that had controlled him for nearly 2 decades. For 1 full year, Ray Charles stayed off the road. No touring. No performing. Just regular visits to doctors who checked his blood, examined his arms, made sure he wasn't using. It was the longest he had been away from music since he was a teenager. When he returned to court in 1966, the results were clear. Ray Charles was clean. The doctors confirmed it. The track marks on his arms were healing. The man who had once been called a common addict by the Indianapolis police had beaten heroin. The judge gave him a 5-year suspended sentence, 4 years of probation, and a $10,000 fine. No prison time. Ray Charles walked out of that courtroom a free man, truly free, for the first time since he was 17 years old. Ray Charles returned to music in 1966 with a vengeance. His first album since kicking heroin was called Crying Time, and it was exactly what it sounded like, the sound of a man who had been through hell and come out the other side. The title track, a cover of a country song by Buck Owens, reached number 6 on the pop charts. The song was about heartbreak, about loss, about the tears that come when everything falls apart. But everyone who knew Ray's story heard something else in it. They heard a man crying for 17 lost years. They heard a man crying for the person he might have been if he had never picked up that first needle. They heard a man crying because he was finally, miraculously, free. Crying Time won Ray another Grammy Award. It was his first Grammy since before the arrests, before the scandal, before the world learned about the track marks on the arms of the genius. The award felt like validation, not just of his talent, but of his recovery. But it was his choice of follow-up single that showed Ray hadn't lost his sense of irony. The song was called Let's Go Get Stoned. Yes, really. The man who had just spent a year proving to the federal government that he was clean released a song called Let's Go Get Stoned. The audacity was breathtaking. The irony was perfect. Critics didn't know whether to be shocked or impressed. Radio programmers hesitated, wondering if this was appropriate, wondering if Ray Charles was mocking his own recovery. Ray just smiled that crooked smile and let the music speak for itself. The song was actually about drinking, not drugs, let's go get stoned, being old slang for getting drunk. But Ray knew exactly what he was doing. He was reclaiming the narrative. He was refusing to be defined by his addiction. He was showing the world that Ray Charles answered to no one. Let's Go Get Stoned became his first #1 R&B hit in years. The public loved it. The irony only made them love it more. He followed it with I Don't Need No Doctor, another not-so-subtle message about his recovery. The song was defiant, almost angry, the sound of a man who had been poked and prodded and examined by government physicians for a year and was tired of being treated like a patient instead of an artist. Ray Charles was back. And he wanted everyone to know it. For the rest of his life, Ray never touched heroin again. Not once. Not ever. He was honest about the fact that he replaced it with other vices, alcohol, marijuana, women. Lots of women. He fathered 12 children with 9 different women over the course of his life, and he made no apologies for any of it. Just like smack never got in the way of my working, he said, same goes for booze and reefer. What I do with my own body is my own business. It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement of sobriety. But it was honest. And it was Ray. Ray Charles lived for another 38 years after kicking heroin. He won more Grammy Awards. He performed for presidents. He became a global icon, a symbol of American music and American resilience. When he died in 2004 at the age of 73, the cause was liver disease, the long-term consequence of decades of alcohol use that had replaced his heroin addiction. But he never went back to the needle. Not once. Not ever. When interviewers asked him about his drug years, Ray usually refused to discuss it. I'm fed up with talking about that aspect of my life, he told Rolling Stone. Jesus Christ couldn't get me to say another word on the subject. He didn't want to be defined by his addiction. He didn't want to be a cautionary tale or a recovery spokesperson. He just wanted to be Ray Charles, the genius, the man who made music that changed the world. But the story of his addiction, his arrest, and his recovery tells us something important about Ray Charles that his music alone never could. It tells us that behind the genius was a man in pain. A man who had been running from grief since he was a child. A man who had watched his brother drown, lost his mother, lost his sight, and tried to fill the emptiness with the only thing that made the hurt go away. And it tells us that even the deepest addiction can be beaten. Not easily. Not painlessly. Not without scars. But beaten. Ray Charles spent 17 years as a prisoner of heroin. He spent the next 38 years as a free man. When you do the math, freedom won. The music won. The man who should have died in a hotel room with a needle in his arm instead lived long enough to become a legend. There's a moment in every addict's life when they have to choose. Keep using and die, or stop using and live. Most people never find the strength to make that choice. The drug is too powerful. The pain is too great. The chains are too heavy. Ray Charles found that strength in a hospital room in California, going through 4 days of hell that would have broken most men. He found it in the memory of his mother, who had told him he wasn't dumb, who had taught him that blindness was no excuse for giving up. He found it in the music that had been his salvation since he was a child, the music that was waiting for him on the other side of withdrawal. "You're blind," his mother had told him. "You ain't dumb. You lost your sight, not your mind." In that hospital room, fighting the worst battle of his life, Ray Charles proved those words true one more time. He had lost himself to heroin for 17 years. But he hadn't lost his mind. He hadn't lost his will. He hadn't lost the thing that made him Ray Charles. And when he walked out of that courtroom in 1966, clean and free and ready to play again, he proved something else. Something that his mother would have been proud of. He proved that the chains we wear are only as strong as we let them be. He proved that even the darkest addiction can be beaten by a man who refuses to give up. He proved that genius isn't just about talent, it's about survival. Ray Charles survived. And then he went back to doing what he was born to do. Making the whole world feel something.